Welcome to Section 3. In this section, we'll cover front-end details and consuming your Django RESTful API. In this section, we'll consider authenticating and communicating with an OAuth 2 server. We'll look at list detail read operations with bookmarks, create operations with bookmarks. We'll look at how users can bookmark our views. We'll extend to all the CRUD operations and extra operations across bookmarks, notes, and comments. Then we'll consider how to deploy in production. Today we'll consider handling authentication. In this video, we'll consider how we configure Django's URLs for Oauth authentication and management and apply database migrations. We'll set up our application for Oauth 2 access. In our React application, we'll make a request for an access token, and we'll look at how we use our access token. Oauth 2 is a protocol that makes use of access tokens. To begin with, the client makes an authentication request to the server using credentials. If these credentials are satisfactory, the server responds by issuing a token. The client then uses this token for all subsequent interactions with the server. The token is valid for a period of time, which depends on server settings, so while that token is valid, the client doesn't need to authenticate again. We'll look at making some changes to our React app from Section 2. We'll go back to near the start to build an application that accesses our Bookmarks REST API server. So we've started a fresh Bookmark Reacts app. The component is as shown on the screen. We have a new file called grommettheme.js, which defines some styling. We have an index.js, which is as per before. Our main component, which renders a small amount of text, and it uses a styling called grommet, which we'll speak about later. All the other modules we created in Section 2 we've put aside for now, and we're not going to use them in this section. We'll now look at how we configure Django for Oauth 2, and then accessing and using a token. So we'll need to move in Atom back to our Django application and the Locations app and urls.py. To configure Oauth 2, we need to make this URL inclusion, which we're putting at /o/. And there'll be a number of URLs that Oauth 2 provides there. Some of them we'll be using in this video. Oauth Toolkit needs some database tables to manage access tokens and applications, amongst other things. After installing this toolkit back in Section 1, we need to apply migrations to the Django database. We do this in our virtual environment. Notice the bookmarks at the start of the command prompt and manage.py migrate. On this computer, the migration has already been done. However, note the Oauth 2 provider. When you run this for the first time, you will have some migrations relating to Oauth 2 provider. With our migrations in place, we can now log in at /admin using the username and password that we used when we created this back in the previous video series. We can see groups and users tables, but also the Django Oauth Toolkit has some tables: access tokens, application grants, and refresh tokens. We could theoretically use them to configure Oauth application, but we're going to use Oauth's views for this instead. By going to location/o/applications, we come up with, in your case, you'll just be able to create a new application. In this computer, an application's already been created. So creating a new application, we need to give it a name. Select confidential as the client type, and we're using a resource owner password-based grant type. Put in the full URL /location/bookmark/ as a redirect URL. Once you're done with that, then save it there's a screen that comes and confirms what you've entered into the database. You can go back and the application is now listed. Take note of the client ID and secret because you'll need those in the React application. They'll be credentials that it will use to be able to log on and then to receive a token. In app.js, we'll make use of that information. In our app component, we have our method component didMount. The first thing this does is it creates an Oauth instance, and in there we need to provide a client ID, which is taken from the web browser screen you've just seen before. The client secret, which can be a bit long. Make sure you include it all with the comma on the end, so this is still a valid object in JavaScript. The web address, which is location/o/token. Include the full URL, so the HTTP and web address, which is localhost:8000, then the redirect URI, and scopes read and write in a list. That's our client Oauth2 instance. This is then, we use getToken with the username and password, which is taken from what you created back in the previous video series and what we used to log into admin. This function will then return a token, which we set on our component in its state. In the state, we have an item called client token, which is an object. Starting off as an empty object, we'll use setState to put the return in there. And that will be our access token, or our client token, which has an access token in it, which we can use to access the web server. So we'll just go into the browser and we'll go into the web development tools to have a look at what this token actually looks like. Just noting that we had a little console log right down the bottom where we log on the render what the client token actually is. This client token consists of a number of elements. It has an access token, which we'll be using for all our subsequent access. It has information about the client request, which includes code, credentials, the JSON web token information, options, which includes the client ID and client secret and the redirection URI we used, plus the scopes of this access token. There's further information here which we won't go through it all. It has a client token information. Key element is the access token, which is still highlighted on the screen. It's also, the access token is available under .data.accessToken. Note the expiry time, or this expiry section, and the token type, which is of type bearer. That will be important later for our requests. That token type is also available as a primary level item in the token object. So if we return to our editor, we'll see where we make use of this client token. In a function called getBookmarks, we'll be getting bookmarks, which we'll talk about later, but the key thing for now is that in the headers, we include the client token access token. So the headers has an item called authorization. In that, it expects a string with bearer and then the access token as a string. Notice with bearer, that needs to be in as a data item, including the space between the word bearer with a capital B and the actual content of the access token. If the space is missing, access will be denied.